We are holding in starting in the next section of the Talmud here. Yeah, we were just about to start. Let's bring up the text. Okay, so we're holding in the Gemara at the bottom of the page, bottom of page 4, Daled Omid Aleph, 4a. That's 3 lines from the bottom. So the Gemara is going back on the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, we're talking about again, trying to figure out we have basically 3 groups of peoples that have times to read. We have the walled cities, and we already described these are walled cities from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, from when Joshua conquered the land. And any city that was walled at that point will keep the 15th. We have the regular cities that keep the 14th, which means open, unwalled cities. And we have, of course, Shushan that was the 15th. And then we have the villagers. Now, the villages don't have a set day, but they have Yom HaChnisa. That whenever there's a day of gathering means that they come into to the villages. Villagers come to the large city. So then they could read the Megillah up. They have a 5-day period, meaning 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 are the 5 days. So the 15 doesn't count for them. So the villagers really have 4 days. They have the 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. Those are the 4 days of a scenario for someone who lives in a village. Now, we said the reasoning basically was because whether they don't have a minion, they don't have a person who knows how to read. We're going to see now new reasons that we're going to introduce of we're allowing for the villagers to come into early and read the Megillah early, and there's machlekes, different reasons. Okay, but now we're going to start the subject. Now there's only one thing that's a bit complicated, and the complicated thing is based on what we learned last week or 2 weeks ago, where you have to have a Sar Batlanim. You have to have 10 idlers, people who don't do anything or that are different definition of what's a Sar Batlanim. But let's just take the basic people that are community assigned people, whether they're always there or available, Hatzalah people, Yedidim people, different people that when the community needs them, or that community needs them to be sitting in shul the whole time, according to others who say God wants to see 10 people sitting in the shul. And that's what we have today in Yerushalayim. At least you have many shuls that don't like to be empty during the day. They have koilels that they're not run by the people of the shul. They're outside people that have a koilel, and they set up. Everyone's happy. The people are learning Torah, and the people are happy to learn Torah. But the idea is that there's people sitting and learning. But we learned that there could be a scenario you could have a large city, population-wise, but doesn't have a Sarah Batlanim. And then it would have the din of a village. So that kind of throws a little bit of things off about you could have a large city in numbers, but they have the halachic, according to some opinions, they have halachic they could be characterized as a village as far as reading the Megillah early, possibly, although they don't fall into the reasoning, whether it is because they need to come into a city or they're lacking a balkora, etc. All right, let's see the subject as much as we can, keeping within the frame of the Talmud versus the halacha. Again, of course, these are not applicable today. No one reads today 11, 12, and 13th, only on the 14th and 15th. So let's see. Ella, Shahakfarim, the villages. Magdimil Mechnisa, they could go the day of the end of the gathering when they come into the city, whether they come in to supply the city or to buy supplies or for Judgment Day. That's why the days are Monday and Thursdays. They could read on those days. Amar Rabbi Chanina. So now Rabbi Chanina, we're starting to analyze why. Chachamim meikelu al kfarim. Again, remember we had a hint to this in the Megillah, zmanim zmanam, that we have to see in the Megillah, in the terminology, in the text of the Megillah, we have a support, not a direct halachic, but a support to the concept of 5 days of reading, meaning the 14th, 15th, and the 11th, 12th, and 13th. So Amar Rabbi Chanina, Chacham meikelu al kfarim, the rabbis were lenient to the villagers, liyos magdimim liyamaknisa, to allow them to read on the day of the gathering. Why? Kidei sheyisapku mayim umazon lachem shebechrachim. So they should be able to provide water and food for the brethren in the cities. Now, Rabbi Steinsaltz, Evan Yisrael, who's we're using over here, adds in the translation over here, on what day are we talking about? When are they bringing the water and the food to the cities? So Rabbi Steinsaltz takes this because it's machlekes of Rishonim, how to understand this statement. There's a disagreement of the commentaries. So Rabbi Steinsaltz says, on the day of Purim, so in order for them to have free, means they're not occupied on Purim with reading the Megillah because they heard it already on the 11th or the 12th, so then they could provide this, they could spend the morning like providing the people of the city for their provisions of the water and the food. If everyone would be busy reading the Megillah on the 14th, the residents of the cities will not have enough to eat. And the residents of the city, Melech and the Sada Nevad, right? The city, the king is dependent on the field. The people in the city are dependent on the field, meaning the people of the villages. They're the ones who grow. They're the ones who farm. They're the ones who are able to, they're out there drawing the water. You don't have these provisions in the city itself. So therefore, if everyone's going to be busy with Purim, then no one's going to have food for the meal, and that's a mitzvah. Not everyone agrees with that being the translation. There's a machlekes between the Ritva, that the Ritva says like this: the maspikim mayim mazim be'em akriya shel hakrachin. Because they provide, we want them to come on that day, so they shouldn't come on another day, which is Purim, and they should provide the water on their set days. The Rashba and the Ran write that hold on, I'm not sure who Skinny is. Hold on a second. People I don't know. I keep an eye on that. Okay, so the Ritva is the one who writes like Rabbi Steinsaltz, so they should be able to bring the water and provisions on the 14th to the 15th. The Rashba and the Ran say that the Maspikim Mayim Mazim B'Yem HaKnisa Ve'Keilu Aleim Sheyikru HaMegillah Ba'Yisei Yom. Then because they come in anyways on Thursdays and Mondays, so it's not right, and they can't read the Megillah on their own. So you would make them come in a third time in the week. And because we want to support the efforts of the villagers, and they're coming in on Mondays and Thursdays to bring the water, so we're lenient with them and allow for them to read the Megillah when they come in. So again, so the Ritva and Rabbi Steinsaltz is using in his basic translation the opinion of the Ritva, that it means to say that they should have time on Purim. It's a big difference. If it means if the reasoning for the allowance of the villagers to read early is because of Purim itself, or because the fact as a so to say as a toiva to them, as a leniency because they're coming in anyways and not to make them come in, so they should be able to do Purim properly for themselves. So the Gemara kind of challenges here and there in this question. In the commentaries over here, it says Rashi himself is not clear what Rashi's opinion is. We'll see Rashi in a second. So the Gemara asks, do we want to say, when we're starting page 5a, sorry, 4b, so do we want to say that the content of krachin have, that the whole reason why the villagers could read earlier is because we want to help the cities, right? So the cities, either according to the Ritva or the Rashba, is either that the city should have food on Purim itself, or that the cities, because the cities are benefiting when they come on Mondays and Thursdays. So really, we're not really focusing on the villagers. We're just really concerned about the cities. So we want the cities to have a flow of food. So we're kind of being lenient to the service, a little bit, a little bit not such a, it's not such a feel good for the villagers. But Tanan chol liyas b'sheni, kfarim vayores gedolos karim b'yam. So he's saying if it's all about the cities, what happens if Purim falls out on Monday? So the 14th falls out on Monday. The villagers anyways come on Monday. So then everyone reads on the Monday. Now, if according to, however you're going to say it, here we see that there's no earlier time. So if according to the Ritva, like Rabbi Steinsaltz says, the question is quite obvious. If the villagers are going to read on the 14th, like everyone else, they're not going to have time to bring water and provisions for the city because they themselves have to hear the Megillah. So we see clearly it's not to benefit the city. And even if you want to say it is because to be makel on them, so in this case, they're also at the end of the day, it's going to affect the water carrying. So he says, "Ve'im isa likadnu liyem knisa." According to you, let them read the Megillah the week earlier, the Monday or Thursday earlier. Why would they read on the 14th? It means even if the 14th falls on a Monday or Thursday, let them read at the earlier Yom HaKnisa. So whatever the reason is, so they could provide on Purim or they could provide on the Monday and Thursday. So the Gemara says no, because if you go that much further, it's possible that if you go back, it's going to turn out that they're going to end up reading on the 10th. Why? Because if you read on Monday, then you have to go all the way back to Thursday, the previous Thursday. So if Monday is the 14th, Sunday is the 13th, Shabbos is the 12th, Friday is the 11th, then Thursday is the 10th, and we don't do the 10th. We only have 11th through the 15th, and for the villagers, 11th through the 14th. The rabbis didn't go so early. They didn't institute that you could go so early. So therefore, we don't have, so everyone has to read on the 14th. So that's what Rashi says. The Rashi says, the member that the content, the krachin, do you want to think that the reason why we give the villagers to read on Yom HaKnisa is because we're trying to benefit the villages, the cities, that they should be able to give water. Now, how do you understand that statement? It's not so clear. Seeming the Ritva will say that Rashi means that they should be able to schlep for someone else on the 14th. Or according to the Ran, you could say so they should be able to not have to schlep and just sit at home and enjoy their Suda like everyone else without having to worry about, like a person has, I also have a meal, right? Someone calls up, please open your shop now. I need to get something. I'm also sitting on my meal. So you could learn Rashi. Rashi could go either way, either according to the Ritva or according to the Ran. So that's what Reb Steinsaltz says over here. The Meimra, the Takante, the Krachenava, the earlier authorities wrote that one could have disproven this statement in a different way by citing the case of cities that do not have 10 idlers. Okay, that's what we spoke about in the beginning of the class. We have a complicated situation. We said before that you have to have Asara Batlanim to make a city, a large city. If you don't have Asara Batlanim means 10 idlers, people who do nothing. So you can have a lot of people in the city, but it's not considered a city, it's considered a village. Even though these are large towns that do not supply food to the cities, so they're not supplying foods to the cities because they're large towns. They're their own little town or big town. So, and they have their own thing going on in their town. They just don't have the definition of a city. Nevertheless, they have the halachic status equivalent to the villages. Therefore, it is apparent that this ruling is not for the benefit of the cities. You could have clearly said, from the fact that as long as you don't have Tzar Batlanim, it's considered a village, and there the villages are not doing anything to help the cities. However, it is preferable to disprove the statement from the case of the villages themselves, meaning the small villages, not the large cities that don't have 10 idlers. Okay? Ariel, if you have a question, I'm going to mute you until then, if that's okay. Okay. So we don't know.
I'm sorry. I thought I wasn't muted. I'm sorry about that. Sorry.
No problem. Aaron, you have a question?
Yeah. How do they become idlers and where do they read?
No, the idlers are the people that the Torah, the Rabbanim decided. When you go into Hilchas Sanhedrin, if you learn the Ram in Hilchas Sanhedrin, there's a certain size of community people that have to be in a city for a city to be a city. For instance, when it comes to Sanhedrin, if you want to have a Sanhedrin of 23 that could listen to capital cases, so there has to be, I think the number is 100 or 101, I forget the number exactly. And the Rambam lists all the different positions that there has to be in the city. Part of a city, the definition of halachic city is that they have 10 idlers. Their job is either, there's different opinions of what their job is. Either they do nothing the whole day, they're kind of supported by the community to be people that sit in the shul are always available. You need we have, it's in Seattle all the time. Avi would maybe be more familiar. You have a WhatsApp that goes out. There's there's someone who passed away. We need a minyan, right? Why? Because there's and even in Yerushalayim you have that. When a person has a yard site, or you have a levaya, not everyone unfortunately has 10 people that could come. So there's people that are ready to be paid to come. People who get paid for Kaddish, people who get paid for other things. There's people who their job is to take care of the community in their needs while everyone else is busy doing other things. A person can't go always to a levaya. Why? Because you're working. But you have 10 people always available, whatever they say, like Hatzalah people. Now, some people will say they can also have jobs, but they're ready to drop their jobs at any point that's needed. But the point is, if you don't have 10 idlers, it's not a city. And some people mean that they just sit in the base medrash all day learning, because God wants to see people learning all day. But the point is that if there is a city that doesn't have whatever that defines the 10 idlers, then there could be a large population, but they have a halachic status of a village, meaning they could read 11, 12, and 13th. And they don't provide anything, because the villages that provide are small villages that have farms and a small they kind of have the benefit of the village, or you want to call it the benefit or the status of a village, but they don't have the activities of the village. Okay. Toshma, the Gemara says, let come and learn. What happens if the 14th falls out on a Thursday? See, the excuse that we say that we don't go to the 10th is because going back from Monday to Thursday would require us to allow them to read the Megillah on the 10th. And we don't do the 10th. But if we read the Megillah, if the 14th falls out on a Thursday, so we can't benefit the cities on the case of Monday. So whatever you want to, let's say the Ritva makes it easier to understand. So they're not going to be free to provide on the Monday because they're going to be listening to the Megillah, but we have no other choice. But what happens if the 14th falls out on a Thursday? You could backtrack to Monday, because then you have Wednesday is going to be the 13th, Tuesday is going to be the 12th, and Monday will be the 11th, and the 11th is an okay day to read for the villagers. And the Mishnah still says that if the 14th order falls out on a Thursday, everyone reads on the Thursday, on the 14th. So let's bring it, at least in that case, let them go back to the 11th, which is on a Monday, and then they could provide the water according to the Ritva on the Yom Tov, on the Purim. The Achad Asaru, it's only the 11th. So the Gemara says no, because we don't push back like that. We made it's like we made a rule that we have the day of the gathering and any day of the gathering before Purim, but we're not going to go back to another day of gathering. That we don't push it back. It doesn't explain 100% why, but we can understand. It's a precedent. Okay. The Tosfos Rosh does discuss this question. Why not? What's the big deal? Go back to the 11th, even if it's another day of gathering. So he says again, because anyways you would have to bring you're not really gaining anything, because then what you're doing is the day that they're going to listen to the Megillah, they're not going to have the same free time anyways. It means if you have that the 14th falls out on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, let's say, or a Sunday, right? So then that's a day that's not a day they would come into the village anyways. Let's say according to the Ritva, so they could come in a third time this week to provide for the extras for the holiday, or they themselves could relax on the extras of the holiday. But if it falls out on a day of gathering, so anyways, that's a day. So what's going to happen? They're going to either bring the water on a Monday, they're going to bring the water on a Thursday. You're not really changing anything. You only really change things when it's not a day of gathering. Because if it's a day of gathering, so anyways, if you're occupied listening to the Megillah, right? Everyone knows the Megillah is not just the 20 minutes of the Megillah. You get dressed up and you go to the shul and you have to gather and you have to wait and there's l'chaim, all those things that happen. So kind of you're just shifting the day. You're not really benefiting it. You only really benefit if the 14th falls out on any day that's not a Monday or Thursday. And then you have, let's say, according to the Ritva, you have an extra day to come in, or you have an extra day to relax yourself. But if you're just going to push it from one gathering day to another gathering day, so whatever it is, so instead of being occupied on Thursday, you're occupied on Monday. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't change anything. There's no real benefit to push back to the Thursday, even though it's in the 11th and the day itself is not a problem. That's what he says that's what the Tosfos Rosh says. The Rashash says another reason is that could just lead to misinterpretation of the rules, and it could be that people will go from a Monday back to a Thursday, and then that's not allowed because it's the 10th. So it's like a gzeira, a chashash. Okay. Okay, so the Gemara continues. The other people, okay, according to the Ran, there's other questions. Let's continue. Tashma, Rabbi Yehuda. Come on here. Rabbi Yehuda says, Amosai, when do they have the Megillah read from the 11th onwards? Meaning, when do the Yom HaKnisa, when is it good for the villagers? Only if they do come in on the Thursdays and the Mondays. You only could read on the Mondays and Thursdays if you come in on the Mondays and Thursdays usually. But if that's not your custom, so you can't just come in on the Mondays and Thursdays to read early. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So again, according to the Ritva, this makes it's easy to read this piece of the Gemara. That because they're not coming into the because they're not, if it's all about benefiting the cities, just because you're not coming in on Mondays and Thursdays, maybe this time you will come in. Why should the Krachim miss out? Now you would come in to provide for the Yom Tov. If the whole purpose is to provide for the village especially, okay, you don't usually come in on Mondays and Thursdays, but now you're going to make an exception. We're doing a special, special delivery for Purim. Right. So now the Gemara answers that there's a misunderstanding. But hold on a second. I just want to go back to the Tosfos, read a second. Okay. According to the opinion of the Ran and the Rosh, I believe the Ran and the Rashba, the idea is actually that the reason why they read earlier is to give them a benefit, right? That we don't want to make them come in early another time. They're coming in anyways. But if it's to benefit the cities, they say, fine, you don't usually come in, but the city's going to benefit. So what's the difference? Okay, so the Gemara says like, don't say so they should be able to give water to the cities. Because they give water to the cities. Because they give water to the cities, and according to most opinions, that means to say, God basically, the rabbis gave them a benefit because of their service throughout the year. Some people say it's because of now, but because they service throughout the year, this is one of their perks. Because they come in every Monday and Thursdays, and they're the providers for the city for what they need. God gives them a perk. The rabbis gave them a perk that they could read the Megillah early and they don't have to inconvenience themselves to come in on a special day. Let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz says it in English. This ordinance was established for the benefit of the villagers, so they should not have to make an extra trip to the cities to hear the reading of the Megillah. However, in a place where the villagers do not go to the cities, advancing their reading of the Megillah to the day of the assembly will not benefit them, and therefore they must read on the 14th. So it's only if they come in. But if they don't come in, so according the Rabbi Steinsaltz is not taking the opinion that it's a benefit because of what they do a whole year, but because they're coming in now anyways, and therefore if they're not coming in anyways, you can't just come in early. But or you could say it's like a gift. It's a perk because they come in throughout the whole year. So if they're not coming in the whole year, you don't get the perk either way. It's a reward for them. Because they're the providers for the whole year, you could say Rashi learns like that pshat. Because they don't come in anyways, you can't just all of a sudden become a villager. Put on your straw hat and say, yeah, I want to hear the Megillah on a Thursday, on a Monday. It's more convenient for me. Oh, it's not a convenience. It's a gift. It's a schar. It's a reward. You don't do the work. You don't get the reward. Okay, simple. So the Gemara says like this. So Reb Shein says like this: because the villagers supplied, the sages were lenient with the villagers and did not require them to make an extra trip to the cities as a reward for the important service they provide to the cities on a regular basis. Okay, so in his Pirush over here, it's not mashma, he's taking on that idea. But in his notes, Reb Shein takes on, I think it's the opinion of the Ritva, that it's a schar, it's a reward for their efforts throughout the year. According to this explanation, it's clear why the reading is not advanced from one day of assembly to another, as doing so would not serve the villagers, would will not save the villagers from making an extra trip to the city. They're coming anyway. So it's see the Rashba. Rabbeinu Chananel asked if the enactment allowing the villages to read the Megillah on the day of the assembly was established in the days of Ezra. How is it possible that the Megillah, which is written earlier, refers to this? Meaning, if the whole vart is because the Ezra was trying to give a perk to the villages, but we're saying that it was already in the Megillah about it. That's what the Gemara says. So the answer, the resolution of this problem is explained in the Talmud Yishalmi, which states that the enactment is indeed an edict of the sages by Ezra. And the verses in the Megillah cited as a source for this enactment are cited merely as an indirect scriptural allusion rather than a firm halachic support. It means that there's a mocker in the Torah, there's a remez in the Torah, that's called a remez, but not that the Megillah actually says, let them come in 11, 12, 13, because 11, 12, 13 was only established for by the rabbis as a perk for the villagers. Hold on a second. The Ritva says the perk is for the day itself. Not the perk is because they provide throughout the year, but because, again, if you're going to make the villagers read the Megillah, means everyone else, there's, I don't know if anyone experienced on the group a Purim Mishulish. Means that a Purim, you have the Megillah read on Thursday night, Friday, and you do the Suda and Shalach Manas on a Sunday. And I could tell you from many years of experiencing this, it changes Purim. It means it makes Purim very long. It's a 3-day Purim. But the stress of Megillah and Shalach Manas and meal, it really kind of gives you more time to relax when you have a 3-day Purim, because hearing the Megillah takes up a whole morning, and there's everyone, the women have to come and the kids have to come, everyone has to hear Megillah, and that kind of stresses out. It's much easier, trust me when I say this, to hear the Megillah on a different day than when you have to do Shalach Manas and Sudas Yantiv, especially in a place like Yerushalayim, where the day of Purim is a lot of traffic, and if you want to drive giving Shalach Manas, it in itself takes a lot of time, because it's, you're trying to drive a car with another 500,000 people trying to drive the car also as well. So it's not an easy experience as it is. It was always stressful for me when I came to Israel to give Shalach Manas, because if I wanted to go to the other side of town to give my Machatan and my Shalach Manas, it was a long story. So I would get up very early and I'd take a taxi and go, before daybreak, and drop the Shalach Manas off outside their door, so I should be able to get in and out before the traffic. But when you don't have to hear the Megillah on that same day, it makes it easier. So the Ritva says if they have to supply water on that day, so again, it just stresses out the day, because you have to hear the Megillah like this. They hear the Megillah a day earlier or 2 days earlier, and then they have. So that's the schar. The schar is for the work on Purim, or according to Rabbi Steinsaltz, how he understands it. Others, the Rashba, who says the schar is because of what they do a whole year, so they get a perk on the day of Purim. Okay, now the Gemara continues. Case the Gemara. Okay, so we finished. The Gemara starts another case. The Gemara continues to explain the Mishnah. Hold on. Okay. Again, according to the opinions of everyone, everyone agrees that the villagers don't keep Purim on the 11th, 12th, 13th. The villagers keep Purim, everything but Megillah, on the day of Purim itself. So therefore, the question is, how they benefit from doing the Megillah earlier. All right. The Mishnah says if the 14th falls out on a Monday, then everyone reads on that day, the 14th. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna reisha denakit sidura diyarcha, u'ma'ishna seifa denakit sidura diyoma." What's the question here? Just in the actual terminology of the Mishnah, so I'm just going to read it. I'm not going to go back to the Mishnah. If you open up the actual Mishnah on page B2, Beis Aleph, BA, so the Mishnah starts off, Megillah Nikreis, the Megillah is read on Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Al Tesvav. So how are we quoting it? The order of the month. First comes the 11th of the month, then comes the 12th of the month, so it's a question just of the text, of the wording of the text, of the how the Mishnah words this Mishnah. That we start off saying 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. Okay, that makes sense, starting the month in its order. And then we say, then the Mishnah continues further down, and the Gemara says, Keitzad, when you want to break down how is it different, how do we read it on these different days? So the Gemara says, Chol liyas yidal b'sheni kfar vayar sedem karim b'ayim mekavs chaim l'machar b'shlishi b'revi magdim liyam mechnisa. So we start off with the order of the days of the month, and then we start with the order of the days of the week. Monday is the 14th. So the first case that the Mishnah explains is when the 14th falls out on a Monday, instead of explaining it when we would be reading on the 11th, right? The 14th, everyone reads on the 14th. So it's just a question of the order of the pasuk of the Mishnah. That first we start off with the order of the city of the month, and then we start with the order of the week. And it's not exactly the order of the month, because on the 14th is not the order of the month. So the Gemara says the answer is kind of simple, because since the days of the week would reverse it the problem is that if we start to explain first the scenario of reading on the 11th, and the reading on the 11th is only if you have it on if it falls out on Sunday, so it kind of would confuse the days, mixing the months, the days of the month, the days of the week. So once we start with the days we say that the days are 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, then we start explaining the scenario throughout, not going the reading backwards, because if Purim falls out on Sunday, then they read on Friday. They read on Thursday. So then you're going back, and that could kind of confuse people. It's confusing to me now as I say it. So it's they just figured to tell us the direction of the month, and then to give the scenarios in a way that wouldn't confuse people. Let's just see what Rabbi Steinsaltz says. Since the early authorities explained that for this reason, the count of the Mishnah started with Monday, not with Sunday. For if it would have started with Sunday, and then the first day of reading for the villages would be on Thursday, the days of the month would be reversed. And additional reason for the starting with the Monday is that on this day, all places are reading at a set time, which is the 14th. From there, it proceeds to discuss Friday and Wednesday, when the times of the reading are changed in the village. Okay, so just a question again, when these things kind of confuse me. So it's confusing when you start trying to figure out the order. So it's better just to kind of simplify it and start with the day that everyone reads, and then we kind of will move in, as opposed to trying to find the first scenario that they read on the 11th, which would be if Purim falls out on Sunday. All right, let's just move forward from there. This is not one of my strengths in trying to figure these things out. Okay. Gemara continues. Cholias be'erev Shabbos. What happens if Purim falls out on a Friday? Means the 14th falls on a Friday. So what happens then? So let's see. Rabbi Steinsaltz says the villages advance to reading to the day of assembly, which is Thursday, because they read on the third. They could go back on the day of assembly, which would be the 13th. The large towns and walled cities read on a Friday, the 14th of Adar. The walled cities can't read on the 15th, we're going to learn, because you can't read the Megillah on Shabbos. So the walled cities go back to the regular cities, and everyone reads on 14th. So then basically, of all groups of the Jewish people, they would be reading on the Thursday and the Friday. Thursday for the villages that could come in on the day of the gathering, and Friday for the cities and the walled cities, because you can't read on Shabbos on the 15th. So Cholis be'erev Shabbos, Masnisa Ma'ani. Who's the opinion of our Mishnah? Rabbi Yossi. You could say it's either the opinion of Rabbi or the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. What's that mean? Okay, again, another place where the Rashi is in its wrong place. Let's go back. This Rashi goes on the previous piece of Gemara. The Mishnah starts off saying that Megillah Nikreis, that the Megillah is read on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. So that's the order of the month. We could say and that's the proper order of how the month would read, that the 11th obviously comes before the 12th, and the 12th before the 13th, etc. When it comes to explain it, then it goes into the days of the week. And then Erev Shabbos Kfar Makdimim Yom HaKnisa are Yud Gimel, Chol Yis B'Shabbos are Yud Beis, Chol Yis Achar Shabbos, and then we start going with the days of the week, and then we have to figure out how the days when was the day of Knisa that the villagers could read. Makdimim Yom HaKnisa are Yud Aleph Umishani, and so the Gemara answers the reason why we don't confuse us again, which is confusing right now, is I did him sapchile nakit sidur the yom klemer aidesh im haya eiches imei Shabbos. If he say the yom chaydish, if we would start the days of the week, starting with Sunday, to go back to reading on a Thursday, it's going to be backwards, v'toya, and it'll be leaving place for misunderstanding. Because a Mishnah lefisha hayitzarch lahaskiron laachriv acher Shabbos tan yudalef b'Shabbos. Yud Beis Erev Shabbos Yud Gimel, because you'd be confusing. You'd be starting from Yud Aleph, which would be on Thursday, etc., etc. The person can make a mistake. And he says, and that's why the Mishnah doesn't say that Thursday is the 11th. It just says that if the 14th falls out on Sunday, then you read on Thursday, and you'll know yourself that's the 11th. But it doesn't articulate it that it's 11th. By not articulating it's the 11th, leaves less room for misunderstanding. Let's move forward. The Gemara says like this: Mani, masnish the mani. Who's our Mishnah that says that if the 15th or the 14th falls out on Friday, the 15th on Shabbos, that everyone, the large cities read on Friday and the villages read on Thursday. Everyone reads on the 14th. This could be either the opinion of Rabbi or the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. What does this mean? So the Gemara is going to explain. My Rabbi, what does it mean, Rabbi? The Tanya we learned. Chol Yis B'Erev Shabbos. We have a brisa that says that if the 14th falls out on a Friday, Erev Shabbos means Friday, and then it's the 14th. Kfarim Vayaras Kedai Makdim Le'Maknisa. So then the villages and the large cities go back to Thursday. And the walled cities coming by Biyam. That's the opinion of the Tanakama. The Tanakama, we're going to learn the reasoning of this machlekes. We're going to see two cases of a Tanakama that's not the same. There's a case where Rebbe argues with the Tanakama. What does it mean? Just the terminology. Tanakama means when you have a Mishnah or a Brisa that has an unnamed opinion, and it doesn't say that these are the opinion of the rabbis. It's an unnamed opinion of, it's called the Tanakama. It's the statement of the Mishnah of someone, and then you could have the opinion that argues on that someone, and usually you know who that person is. So in this case, the Tanakama, who the unnamed rabbi, so to say, says that we would be reading in if the 14th falls on a Friday, so the large cities that are not walled, the Prazim, they go back to the 13th with the villages. And the walled cities that can't read on the 15th because it's Shabbos, they read on the 14th. What would be the reasoning for that? So there should always be a difference between walled cities and unwalled cities. And you can't, so they don't want that the walled cities and unwalled cities should read the same day. So what do? You push the unwalled cities back a day, and you put the walled cities on the 14th. So that's the opinion of the Tanakama. Chol Yis B'Erev Shabbos, if Purim falls on a Friday, the large cities and the villages go to the 13th, which is the Thursday, and the walled cities go to the 14th. Rabbi says no. Rabbi says, I say, it's brought down in Mefarshim. I forget who said it, that when Rabbi was so humble, it says that Rabbi represented the midah, the attribute of anav, of humility. So he was so humble, Rabbi is the author of the Mishnah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So Rabbi says, I say, he says it like, not to give him like, doesn't talk strong. He says, if you're asking me, sorry, the unwalled cities cannot be pushed out of their spot. Their spot is the 14th, they read on the 14th. Both the large cities and the walled cities read on the 14th, and the villages read on the 13th, which is a Thursday. So Rebbe disagrees with the Tanakama, and that's our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that if the 14th falls out on a Friday, then the large cities that are unwalled and the walled cities all read on the 14th. So therefore we could say that Rebbe is our Mishnah, is the opinion of Rebbe. So the Gemara asks the question, my Tana, the Tanakama. Whoa, hold on a second. What's the reason of the initial opinion of the Mishnah? Why would we push the unwalled cities out of their spot to the 13th, just because the walled cities can't read on their spot, which would be Shabbos, because you're not allowed to read the Megillah on Shabbos. So they say they have a verse to support this idea. Why? Because the Megillah says in Esther 9:27, B'chol shana v'shana, that every year has to be consistent. Ma kol shana v'shana ayaris kaidim mukafim, just like every regular year. If Purim does not fall on the 14th, does not fall out on a Friday. So then the cities read before the walled cities. The unwalled cities read before the walled cities, right? The 14th is for the unwalled cities, and the 15th is for the walled cities. So too, if it happens that the 14th falls on Friday, and therefore the walled cities cannot read on the 15th, you have to push the cities a day further back. So they should always read first. That's the opinion of Tanna Kama, because he has a pasuk, he has a verse again to support this opinion. Rashi says, the Torah says, the Megillah says clearly, every year you should have these 2 days, meaning the 14th and the 15th, as their days and as their times. Every year has to be equal. That what? That the unwalled cities read a day earlier. That's it. And if it works out that you have to read on the walled cities on the 14th, then you have to push the unwalled cities back to the 13th. That's the opinion of the rabbis, of the Tanna Kama. So the Gemara says, 1 second, based on your logic, that you want to use the verse in the Megillah to support that that every year has to be equal. Why don't you apply to the idea that every year the cities that are not walled will read on the 14th? And that means that every time you read the 14th, it has to be read the Megillah on the 14th. And that's it. And if it works out that you can't read the 15th on the 15th, then you have to read the same time. Why are you using the verse to say that the unwalled cities have to always read earlier? Why don't you just use the verse to say that the unwalled cities always read on the 14th? Because there's no other way. We have no other choice. You can't read on the 14th, because then you're going to be reading on the same day as the 15th. And that we don't want. That's more important than reading on the 14th. Obviously, you could argue either way. What makes it important? There's a reasoning behind. We're going to see in a second. There's a reason behind the machlekes. And by the way, there's a reason why they disagree. I'll get there in a second. Rashi says, you can't have them read on the 14th, because then they won't be a day earlier, because you can't read on the 15th on Shabbos. Therefore, that's more important than keeping the date of the 14th. Rebbe, my time, 1 second. So that's the opinion. That's their logic. So why does Rebbe disagree with that? So the Gemara says, "B'chol shana v'shana, my kol shana v'shana ein ayaris nidachim m'kaimim, afkan leidachim ayaris m'kaimim." Rebbe uses the exact logic that the Gemara asks the question. The Rebbe disagrees with how he understands the verse. The primary of the verse is that you have to read on the 14th. Not that the primary of the verse means that you have to always read a day earlier. And that comes first. And therefore, you have to always read on the 14th if you have a chance. And therefore, if the 15th falls out that you have to on Shabbos and you have to read a day earlier, so be it. But we're not going to read any earlier. We're not going to read any earlier for the 14th. Why doesn't he agree with the Tanna Kama? Why doesn't Rebbe agree that the primary of the verse is coming to teach us that you always have to read a day earlier? So he says the same answer. It's not possible. Why is it not possible? Because the main part of the verse is to say you have to read on 14th. So the argument is not an argument of, there's no difference in any information. There's no difference in any information of the argument. The argument is basically everyone has the same verses, and each one could argue how to learn the verses. The difference is what's motivating them. What's more important for the rabbis? According to the Tanna Kama, what's more important is that the unwalled cities always read before the walled cities. And according to Rebbe, it's always important that the unwalled cities read on the 14th. What's the reasoning behind the machlekes? So here the Chassam Sofer brings down that this is based on the machlekes, the argument between the Ran and the Ramban. That Rebbe holds like the Ramban, that the main emphasis over here is the 14th, is the cities that are unwalled. Why? Because they were the most vulnerable. By being unwalled cities, they were exposed to Haman's decree on a much higher level. Because not only were they endangered from the villagers, the people in their city, anyone could have come into the city like the Jewish people experienced throughout our diaspora of pogroms and crusades that came into the cities. The Cossacks came into the cities and murdered the Jews. So the unwalled cities were more vulnerable. Therefore, the miracle of Purim was more for the unwalled cities, and therefore they have precedent. They always keep the 14th. They come first. And that's why Rebbe holds. And therefore, we always read on the 14th. According to the opinion of the Ran, which is the opinion of Tanna Kama, he says, on the contrary, that the reason why we read on the 15th is to give kavod to Eretz Yisrael, to show that Eretz Yisrael is unique. That comes first. And therefore, the Eretz Yisrael always has to read on its own day. And if the walled cities, which is kind of giving kavod to Eretz Yisrael, giving respect to Israel, to Eretz Yisrael, is going to be reading on the 14th, you have to give them their own day and push back the unwalled cities to the 13th. That's the Chassam Sofer learns the reasoning behind the argument, because in text-wise, the argument goes both ways. They're both using the same verses, the same logic, just what's the emphasis. So the reason why the emphasis of the Tanna Kama is the 14th, because the Tanna Kama holds that the emphasis, that the main miracles is the unwalled cities, and Rebbe holds no. The main idea is to promote Eretz Yisrael. Very much a Rebbe thing. That's okay. That's how our Mishnah goes according to Rebbe. My Rabbi Yossi, how would our Mishnah go according to Rabbi Yossi? Again, that our Mishnah says that either way, our Mishnah is of the opinion like Rebbe, that if Shabbos falls out on the 15th, or the 15th falls out on Shabbos, that both the walled and unwalled cities read on the Friday. So that's either the opinion of Rebbe or Rabbi Yossi. What's Rabbi Yossi? The Tanya, we've learned another brayse, another Tanna Kama, and another Rabbi Yossi, another argument. Shabbos. What happens if the 14th falls on Friday? So then the Tanna Kama in this brayse says, this Tanna Kama has a different opinion than the other Tanna Kama. This unnamed rabbi says that the walled cities go back to the 13th. The walled cities go to the 13th. The villages read on the 13th, which is the Thursday, if they so choose. And the unwalled cities read Bo B'Yom on the 15th, on the 14th, which is Friday. By Yaras Kedai, Karim by BM, they read on the day, which is the 14th. So this is not the same Tanna Kama as the one who argues with the Rebbe, but Rabbi Yossi argues with them as well. Rabbi Yossi says no. The walled cities never go before the cities. Everyone reads on the 14th, which is the Friday. And that would be, again, our Mishnah. Now, what's the logic between the argument in this case, between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi? My Tanna Kama, the Tanna Kama says again, uses the same verse. It says this is how it should be every year. My call just like every year, the cities read on the 14th, and the times of the walled city is different. It's not important when that different is, but it's different. So in this case, the 14th is always going to be read for the cities of the unwalled cities, and you can't have the walled cities on the same day. Again, you could use the same logic of the Chassam Sofer, that the Tanna Kama holds the same opinion, that the main simcha of Purim is for the unwalled cities. They were the vulnerable ones. The only difference is that it has to be on a different day. And the different day is going to be that you read the walled cities have to read the 13th, because we don't move Purim, we don't move the Boi Bayoim of the 14th, because that's the primary day. So Rashi says, my kol shana v'shana ayoris b'yudal, that the unwalled cities always read on the 14th. You never push them. Would like a Tanna Kama the Rebbe. It's obviously not the same Tanna Kama as Rebbe, because the Tanna Kama of Rebbe says that it always has to be the 14th, that the unwalled cities read a day earlier. And here he says it's always that the unwalled cities read on its day, and they're not the same day as the walled cities. Therefore, clearly, he's not our Mishnah. The Tanakama of this brisa is not either our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, again, asks the same question. So why don't we use the verse to say, like, to support Rabbi Yossi, that just like every year, the walled cities never read before the unwalled cities. That's unheard of. So too, unfortunately, that's the Gemara says, we have no other choice. Again, what does it mean we have no other choice? Because the question is, what's the primary? The primary is that we have to read the unwalled cities on the 14th, according to this Tanakam. If you have to push the walled cities back a day, that's not my problem. But we have to read the unwalled cities on the 14th, and they can't be read on the same day. If we're not going to bring the walled cities back to the 13th, which would be the Thursday, then you're going to have to move the unwalled cities, because you can't have them read on the same day. Or you have to read them on the same day. We don't want to read them on the same day. So therefore, the only choice we have is to move the walled cities to the 13th. My time is Rabbi Yossi. Why does Rabbi Yossi disagree with this Tanakama, with this unnamed rabbi? So he says, what are you talking about? There's never a scenario that a walled city is before an unwalled city. I'm sorry. We're not going to have the walled cities read before. So too, in this case, unfortunately, that's just the way it's going to have to be. So the Gemara says, again, let's use the verse, that we have to have every year the way it is, and that is that they're not read on the same day. So here we see that, what is the Gemara answering? Where it says, okay, I hear what you're saying, that they have to be on separate days. That's only when we can. We're not going to have the walled cities read before the unwalled cities. Means the question over here is, again, in all four cases, means the two Tanakamas and Rabbi Yossi and Rebbe, we have all the same words, the same verses to support. It's the logic that dictates. And usually, this is an interesting, unique scenario. Why is it a unique scenario? Because here we're using the logic of the logic of the process over the verses. Means because you could use the verses anyway, and at the end of the day, we're going to have to follow the idea of le'efsha. Means we have a verse that says it has to be every year. We have the verse that says consistency, and we have the svara, the logic. So because the verse that says consistency is not going to be able to be 100% consistency either way, because you can't read on Shabbos. So therefore, we could use the svara, the logic, to dictate where the verse is applicable or not, and we could use it all based on what the Sam Sofer says about what's the primary of the holiday? Is the primary the 14th day? Is the primary point of Purim to celebrate the risk, the celebration, the Hatzalah, the salvation that happened to the unwalled cities because they were the most vulnerable? Or we're going to try to point out the uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael, which is it seems to be a bit far stretched, because that's not really about Purim. Eretz Yisrael's uniqueness is not, because you have to remember, let's walk back to the actual text of the Megillah. The actual reason why we celebrate the 15th is because in the city of Shushan, they only rested on the 15th. They had 2 days to get rid of their enemies. So Shushan did not, and the day of Purim is on the day of rest. Shushan is not going to celebrate the 14th because they didn't rest on the 14th. They were fighting on the 14th. They fought an extra day. And the reason why we extend that celebration to cities in Eretz Yisrael is to give kavod to Eretz Yisrael. So Rebbe, kind of according to the Chazal Sofer, Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi are extending that kavod to Eretz Yisrael to make that becomes the primary of the holiday. Although, because we could say, because Shushan was the primary, that's where the story happened. Okay, let's go further. V'savar Rebbe Ayaris le'dachin liyom haknisa. Does Rebbe hold that we don't push cities to the 14th, cities to the Thursday? Fatani, we learned Choliyas b'Shabbos. What happens if the 14th falls out on Shabbos? So Kfar Magdim Knisa. So when in theory can you read the Megillah? You could read the Megillah on Thursday, which is the day that the villagers would read, which would be the 13th of the month, or you could read on Friday, you could read on on Thursday, which is the 12th of the month, or you could read on Friday, which is the 13th of the month. You can't read on the 14th because the 14th is Shabbos, and you can't read the Megillah on Shabbos. The 15th is not a problem because then we read on Sunday. So the Gemara says, "V'sover Rabbi Ayares lo yidachinin yom haknisa v'tanya chaldis b'Shabbos." If the 14th falls on Shabbos, then kfar magdim yom haknisa v'Ayares kedayis karim be'erev Shabbos u'mukafos chaymer l'machar. So we have a brisa that says, so in that case, the Tanna Kama would say, villagers read on the 12th, which is Thursday. Large cities can't read on Shabbos, so they read on the 13th, which is Friday. And obviously the 15th on Sunday is not a problem, so the 15th is read on Sunday. Shabbos is not read. But Rabbi doesn't say that. Rabbi Omer Ani, I say, my humble opinion, if we're already pushing the large cities off the 14th, because they can't read on Shabbos, then push them back to the Yom HaKnisa, to the 12th, which is Thursday. So we see that Rabbi holds you could push back. So why does Rabbi say in our case that if the 15th falls out on Shabbos, let him put the 15th on the 14th, and then unwalled cities to go to the 13th, like he says if the 14th falls out on Shabbos. Hechi Ashling, what are you talking about? Hasam zmanim Shabbasi, v'hoyel denitchu yidachu. Right? Rebbe says, anyways, you can't read on the 14th itself. Why? Because it's Shabbos. So if you're already pushing it back, push it back to the 13th, so everyone reads on Yom HaKnis, everyone reads on, at least two groups read on the same day. But Halakha Zemanim Erev Shabbos, but here you're telling me the 14th falls out on Friday, and you want me to push it back because I have to be a day earlier? I don't subscribe to that. Better to do, boy b'yem. Halakha Erev Shabbos Zemanim, ve'en lecha tzarech l'chaysan. There's no reason to push them back. So the Gemara says, let's just finish off that, and then we have 4 minutes. Let's finish off these last two pieces of Talmud. Come on, the Gemara asks the question, who's the opinion? How the Amr Reb Chelbai Amr Reb Huna, the opinion of Reb Chelbai in the name of Reb Huna that says Purim Shechali is b'Shabbos, if the 14th falls out on Shabbos. Hakol Nedachim Yom HaKnisa, everything gets pushed back to the Thursday, which would be again the 12th. So Gemara says, everyone gets pushed back. That's surely no reason to push back the walled city. They have the 15th. The 15th is on a Sunday. Anything that's pushed back gets pushed back to the day of Knisa. That's the opinion of Rabbi. So Rabbi is the Rabbi Chelbai in the name of Rav Huna, which is an Amoira, which is a Talmudic scholar, goes according to the opinion of Rabbi, which holds that if we're pushing that if Shabbos falls on the 14th falls on Shabbos, so you might as well push everything back to the Yom HaKnisa. Makes it easier to everyone to read on the day of the Thursday. So the Gemara just says the one last thing. This is a famous piece of the Gemara, and then we're going to learn. We'll stop here. The Gemara says, "Tekuli alma mia Megillah b'Shabbos lekarinan." We had a long conversation now about the idea that you cannot read the Megillah on Shabbos. Who says? The Gemara says, "Tekuli alma mia Megillah b'Shabbos lekarinan." Does everyone agree that we do not read the Megillah on the Shabbos? My time, what's the reason? So here's the famous opinion of the Talmud that's brought down about other halachas, like we're going to see. Amar Rabbah, this is the famous Rabbah, who is the teacher of Abai and Rava. Hakol chayavim b'kiris Megillah. Everyone is obligated, men and women, to read the Megillah. Ubit ki shofar, according to some opinions, and to blow the shofar. We'll see what's the connection to the shofar. Ve'ein hakol b'kimim b'mikra Megillah, but not everyone knows the laws. We're concerned someone's going to go to the expert to study and carry the Megillah on Shabbos. We have Renu Arba Amis B'Shus Haram is going to carry 4 arm lengths in the public domain on Shabbos, and that's forbidden. And the Gemara finishes off, V'hainu Tamid the Shofar, V'hainu Tamid the Lulav. And that's why we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos. Everyone knows that for Rosh Hashanah, I'm going to go back to this. We'll start again next week from this piece, but I just wanted to learn it, that if the Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, which can happen on the first day, we don't blow the shofar for the same reason, Gzeir de Rabbah. That maybe a person's going to say, how do I blow the shofar? Is the shofar kosher? And going to carry the shofar to the rabbi, and you end up carrying, that's the same reason why we don't shake the lulav on the Shabbos for the same reason, the concern a person may carry. And there's hundreds of Hasidic discourses. Today's Yud Shvat. So we mentioned, I can't go to the class without mentioning the idea of Hasidim and Yud Shvat. There's so many Hasidic discourses that deal with this question, that how could you push a mitzvah? In the case of Megillah, it's not so strong because Megillah itself is only Divrei Ruach HaKodesh. How could you push a Megillah? How could you push a mitzvah because of Gzeira? Because a concern that maybe someone is going to carry. That's a concern. Why does a concern override a mitzvah? So this explains it at length, the idea of Shabbos, that really it's because the Shabbos has in it the mitzvah itself, and it elevates the person to where you're at. Everyone can learn those ideas on their own. So I'm going to finish off with one idea over here. It says, hold on a second. There's something I wanted to point out. All right, it's just technical ideas about this Rav Huna. All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Laila Tov, Yom Tov, and hope to see you next week. Sorry, I missed someone said something on the chat. Oh, what did you just say? Okay. Laila Tov, everyone. Take care.